The fluorescent lights of the cramped conference room hummed with a headache-inducing buzz, matching the pounding rhythm in my temples. It was Monday morning, the time for the dreaded all-hands meeting, and once again, I was the designated target for the day. Stellan, our insecure department head, stood by the whiteboard like a predator toying with a wounded mouse. He held a thick red marker in his hand, the cap already discarded on the dirty carpet floor. He had spent the last 10 minutes dissecting my work. "Look at this," Stellan sneered, circling a section of my quarterly report so vigorously that the whiteboard squeaked in protest. "A formatting error on page 3, a dangling participle on page 7. It is sloppy, Ira. It is completely amateur." The room was dead silent. 20 of my colleagues stared at their laps, terrified to make eye contact. They knew that if they looked up, they might be next. "This is exactly why you will never last here, Ira," Stellan announced, his voice booming with theatrical disappointment. "You simply lack the pedigree for corporate excellence. You are just filler. You are a warm body to occupy a chair until we find someone real." He tossed the red marker at me. It struck the lid of my laptop with a sharp clack and rolled onto the table. I didn't flinch. I just stared at his shiny, cheap tie, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the room swung open with a heavy swoosh. The board of directors walked in, grim-faced and serious. Flanking them was a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke suit, Lucian, the incoming CEO sent to rescue our failing company. Stellan's reaction was instantaneous and pathetic. He straightened his tie so fast he nearly choked himself, and a fake, oily smile plastered onto his face. He was sweating profusely. "Mr. Lucian, welcome, sir. What an honor," Stellan stammered, stepping over the red marker he had just thrown. "I was just disciplining the junior staff. Setting high standards, you know how it is. We have to keep the ship tight." Lucian didn't even blink. He didn't look at Stellan. He didn't look at the board. He scanned the room with piercing blue eyes, searching for something or someone. His gaze swept over the rows of terrified analysts, the trembling middle managers, and the empty coffee pots. Then he stopped, his eyes locked onto me. For a second, the stoic mask of the corporate shark dropped completely. A look of genuine, warm recognition softened his sharp features. He ignored Stellan's outstretched hand and walked right past him, moving through the rows of chairs. "Ira," Lucian asked, his voice filled with disbelief and warmth, "I didn't know you were hiding here." The silence in the room changed from fearful to stunned. You could hear a pin drop. Stellan looked like he had just swallowed a piece of broken glass. "My name is Ira." And in that moment, Stellan just realized he had been bullying the only person in the room who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. To understand the look of absolute horror on Stellan's face, you have to understand who I used to be. 3 years ago, I wasn't a low-level data analyst in a dusty office in the middle of a small town. I lived in New York City. I was a high-level crisis manager at a Fortune 500 company, working directly under Lucian. I was his right hand. We solved impossible problems together. When companies were burning to the ground, we were the ones who walked through the fire to put them out. I managed mergers, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers. But life has a way of humbling you. My mother, who lived in this small town, got sick. It was aggressive, and she needed full-time care. I didn't think twice. I resigned, left the penthouse and the 6-figure salary, and moved back home to be a caregiver. I needed a job that was quiet. I needed health insurance, and I needed to leave at 5:00 p.m. sharp to administer medication. So I scrubbed my resume. I removed the titles, the awards, and the high-profile references. I applied for a junior analyst role here, thinking I could just keep my head down, do the work, and survive. I wanted a quiet life. But Stellan had made sure my life was anything but quiet. He saw my silence as weakness, not resilience. For the last 6 months, my life under Stellan had been a specific kind of torture. It wasn't just that he was a bad boss. He was a petty tyrant who thrived on making people feel small. Because I was just an analyst, he treated me like his personal servant. He forced me to pick up his dry cleaning on my lunch break, threatening to dock my pay if I was 5 minutes late. He would take my detailed, perfect reports, slap his name on the cover, and present them to the regional directors as his own brilliant ideas. And then there was Tamsin. Tamsin was Stellan's favorite. She was 22, had zero experience, and spent the entire workday online shopping for shoes. Yet last month, Stellan promoted her to senior coordinator simply because she laughed at his jokes and stroked his fragile ego. Tamsin did no work. She just sat there, looking pretty and making life harder for the rest of us. "Why do you take it?" a coworker had whispered to me once. I took it because the health insurance covered my mother's chemotherapy. I took it because every time Stellan yelled, I imagined my mother getting stronger. But beneath my silence, a deep, volcanic anger was building. I was an expert in crisis management, and I was watching a crisis form right at my own desk. The tension had reached a breaking point exactly 1 week before Lucian walked through those doors. I had been working late, finishing a project that Tamsin was supposed to do, when I found the discrepancy. Stellan was faking the client metrics. He was inflating the numbers to boost his quarterly bonus. It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate fraud. I had confronted him privately in his office, thinking I was doing him a favor. "Stellan, look at this. These numbers don't match the server logs. If corporate sees this, it's fraud." Stellan hadn't thanked me. He had turned purple. He stood up and leaned over his desk, pointing a shaking finger in my face. "If you say a word to anyone, I will fire you for gross misconduct," he hissed. "I will blackball you in this town. You're a nobody, Ira. You have no friends, no power, and no future. Remember that." I remembered it. I remembered every word. Back in the present, Lucian was standing in front of my desk, his hand extended. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly, and took his hand. "It's good to see you, Lucian," I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced. Stellan, recovering from his initial shock, practically jumped between us. He couldn't let this narrative spin out of his control. "You know Ira," Stellan laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that grated on the ears. "Well, that's a surprise. She's struggling." "Actually, sir, I've been trying to coach her, but she has a hard time with the basics. We were just discussing her future." Lucian didn't let go of my hand. He turned his head slowly to look at Stellan. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by cold steel. "Struggling," Lucian repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Ira orchestrated the merger of the century 3 years ago in Manhattan. She saved my previous company $10 million in a single afternoon. If she is struggling, Stellan, it is because she is being severely mismanaged." Stellan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had no words. The color drained from his face as the realization hit him. Lucian turned back to me, smiling again. "We need to catch up. Lunch, my treat. I want to hear everything." "I'd love that," I said. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving the board of directors confused and Stellan standing alone at the whiteboard, the red marker still lying on the floor where he had thrown it at me. The shift in power was palpable, hanging in the air like ozone after a storm. Lunch was wonderful, but I kept the conversation light. I didn't tell Lucian about the abuse yet. I wanted to see how this played out. I wanted to see if Stellan would hang himself with his own rope. When I returned to the office, Stellan cornered me in the break room. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, manic energy. He was sweating through his shirt, and his eyes darted around the room. "Why didn't you tell me you knew him?" he hissed, blocking the doorway so I couldn't leave. I poured myself a cup of coffee, taking my time. I added sugar. I stirred it slowly. "You never asked about my background, Stellan. You only asked about my typing speed and if I could pick up your laundry." Stellan ran a hand through his thinning hair. He changed tactics immediately, trying to be buddy-buddy. He forced a smile that looked painful. "Look, Ira, we got off on the wrong foot. I can be intense, I know, passionate. But let's keep the past between us, okay? We're team players here. I scratch your back, you scratch mine." I took a sip of coffee and looked him dead in the eye. "I'm always a team player, Stellan. The question is, are you?" I walked past him, leaving him shivering in the cold air of the break room. Lucian wasted no time. That afternoon, He sent out a company-wide email asking for a comprehensive audit of department efficiency. Stellan panicked. He knew exactly what that audit would find. It would show that Tamsin had done zero work in 6 months. It would show that Stellan had done even less. And worst of all, it would show the fraudulent metrics I had found. He needed to destroy the evidence. From my desk, I watched him whisper frantically to Tamsin. She nodded, looking scared, and typed furiously on her computer. Then I took a planned bathroom break. When I came back 5 minutes later, my screen was black. My files were gone. My entire hard drive had been wiped. Stellan was nowhere to be seen, but Tamsin was applying lip gloss at her desk, pretending nothing had happened. Stuck to my monitor was a bright yellow sticky note with a smiley face drawn on it. It read, "Oops, system crash, hope you have backups." My heart hammered in my chest. They had deleted everything. The evidence of the fraud, the proof of my work, the records of Tamsin's incompetence. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had won. I sat down in my chair. Most people would have burst into tears. Most people would have run to HR or screamed. But I wasn't most people. In my previous high-stakes life, handling billion-dollar crises, I learned one golden rule: always keep a local encrypted backup. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, heavy external hard drive. I plugged it into the USB port. Within seconds, my files were restoring. But I didn't stop there. I accessed the administrative tools, skills I had kept hidden from Stellan because he never bothered to ask what I could do. I pulled the audit logs for the server. There it was, clear as day. The logs showed that the command to delete my user profile didn't come from a system crash. It came from Tamsin's user terminal, authorized by Stellan's admin password at exactly 2:14 p.m. I had the smoking gun. But I didn't run to Lucian yet. In a game of chess, you don't reveal your queen until the king is trapped. I saved the log file to my external drive and waited. I was going to let them dig the hole a little deeper before I pushed them in. The next morning, Lucian announced a special project. He needed a complete turnaround strategy for our failing department to present to the board in 3 days. Stellan, naturally, dumped it on me. He called me into his office, closing the blinds. "You're going to write this strategy, Ira. You're going to do the work, and you're going to put my name on the cover." "And if I don't?" I asked calmly. "Then I'll tell Lucian you're mentally unstable," Stellan said, a cruel glint in his eye. "I have HR on my side. Mavis and I go way back. Who is he going to believe? The new CEO who hasn't seen you in 3 years, or the current management and HR records?" It was a solid threat. Mavis in HR was indeed Stellan's ally, and she was known for being corrupt. "Fine," I said. "I'll write it." I went back to my desk and started typing. I wrote a brilliant strategy. It was flawless. But I decided to write a strategy that relied on very specific, complex financial modeling, math that only I understood. Math that Stellan couldn't bluff his way through. I was setting a trap, and he was walking right into it. I worked for 2 days straight. The report was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. It included algorithmic projections, overhead variance models, and predictive analytics. On the morning of the deadline, I printed it out. I put Stellan's name on the cover in big, bold letters, just as he had asked. "Here it is, Stellan," I said, handing it to him. He weighed it in his hands, looking pleased. He was so arrogant, so sure of his dominance, that he didn't even open it. He didn't read a single page. He just assumed it was simple enough for him to wing it. "Good girl," he said dismissively. "Now get back to your data entry. The adults have a presentation to make." He marched toward the boardroom, clutching the report like a trophy. He thought he had won. He thought I was beaten. He had no idea that he was carrying a ticking time bomb, and he had just pulled the pin himself. I waited 2 minutes, then grabbed my notebook and slipped into the back of the boardroom. I sat in the shadows, silent and invisible, waiting for the fireworks to start. The board meeting was in full swing. Stellan stood at the head of the table, projecting confidence. He clicked through the first few slides, reading the bullet points I had written. And as you can see, Stellan boasted, my vision for the department involves a radical restructuring of our fiscal inputs. Lucian sat at the other end of the table. He hadn't smiled once. Stop, Lucian said, raising a hand. Stellan froze. Sir. Slide 4, Lucian said. Go back. Stellan clicked back. The screen displayed a complex chart involving the algorithmic projection on overhead variance. To a layman, it looked impressive. To Stellan, it looked like hieroglyphics. Stellan, Lucian said softly, walk me through this algorithmic projection. Specifically, how you calculated the beta coefficient relative to the market downturn. The room went silent. Stellan stared at the screen. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He looked at the numbers, and the numbers mocked him. Oh, well, Stellan stammered. It's standard variance, sir. Industry standard. Lucian leaned back, crossing his arms. It's not standard. It's a proprietary model that Ira used to use in New York. I recognize the formula. Did you write this, Stellan? Stellan looked around the room, panic rising in his throat. The board was staring at him. He was drowning, and his instinct for self-preservation kicked in. He broke. Ira drafted the data, Stellan blurted out, his voice cracking. I just oversaw the vision. She's the one who crunched the numbers. If it's wrong, it's her fault. She must have made a mistake. He pointed a shaking finger at me in the back of the room. She's incompetent. I told you she was struggling. Lucian slowly turned his chair to face me. Is the data wrong, Ira? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt and walked toward the front of the room. No, sir, the data is perfect, and I'm happy to explain the math since I wrote every word of it. Stellan was forced to sit down in a small junior chair against the wall. I took the clicker from his sweaty hand. For the next 20 minutes, I dazzled the board. I explained the strategy with confidence and precision. When I finished, the board looked impressed. Stellan looked sick. He knew he had been exposed as a fraud, and his anger was turning into something dangerous. Stellan was humiliated, but he wasn't done. He was a cornered rat, and rats bite. Immediately after the meeting, he stormed down to Human Resources. He went straight to Mavis. Mavis was the HR director, a woman who hated conflict and loved doing favors for her friends. She had protected Stellan for years. We need to get rid of her, Stellan told her, packing her office. She's undermining me. She made me look like a fool in front of the CEO. Mavis sighed, clicking her pen. Lucian likes her, it's risky. She's a liability, Stellan shouted. Make it happen, Mavis, or do you want me to tell everyone about the bonuses you approved for yourself? Mavis paled. Fine. Together, they hatched a plan. They opened my personnel file and began to fabricate documents. They created a performance improvement plan, PIP, and backdated it 3 months. They forged warnings for lateness and insubordination. They built a paper trail of lies to make it look like I had always been a problem. They were building a cage to trap me in. 2 hours later, Mavis called me into her office. Stellan was there, leaning against the wall with a smug grin. Mavis slid a folder across the desk. Ira, we have a problem. We have records of repeated insubordination and poor performance going back to January. I opened the folder. My eyes widened. This is a lie. I've never seen these forms. This signature isn't even mine. The record stands, Mavis said coldly. Look at this date, January 14th. You were absent without leave. I looked at the date. I remembered that day vividly. I wasn't in the office that day, I said, my voice trembling with rage. I was at the hospital. My mother was starting a new round of chemotherapy. I have the hospital records to prove it. Mavis shrugged. We have no record of a leave request. Sign this acknowledging your termination for cause, or we will fight your unemployment claim. It was a frame job, pure and simple. I won't sign this, I said. Then get out, Stellan sneered. You're suspended pending an investigation. I walked out of the office, but I stopped in the hallway. I pulled out my phone. This was a one-party consent state. I could record them. I turned on the recorder and walked back in. I pushed open Mavis's door. I want to discuss this again, I said firmly. Stellan laughed, back to beg. I want to know why, I said, making sure my phone was recording clearly in my pocket. Why are you doing this? You know those documents are fake. Stellan, arrogant and thinking he had already won, took the bait. It doesn't matter if it's true, Ira, he said, his voice dripping with malice. It matters what's in the file. Lucian won't save you if you have a bad HR jacket. He's a corporate guy. He follows the paperwork. You're done. So you're admitting you forged them? I asked. I'm admitting that I run this department, Stellan said, and you are nothing. I left the office for the second time, but this time I was smiling. I had the recording. For the next 3 days, I was suspended. I sat at home, caring for my mother, waiting. At the office, Stellan was busy burying me. He told the entire staff that I had been caught stealing data. He told them I was escorted out by security. Tamsin laughed about it in the break room, making jokes about my downfall. Lucian was away on a business trip to Tokyo. Stellan thought the timing was perfect. He thought that by the time Lucian returned, I would be a distant memory. Stellan started moving his things. He ordered a new ergonomic chair. He even started measuring the executive suite, assuming that with me gone and the strategy presented, his promotion to VP was inevitable. He walked around the office like a king. He had no idea that the guillotine was already falling. He just couldn't see the blade yet. Lucian returned on a rainy Thursday night. He went straight to the office, expecting to find me working late. Instead, he found Stellan. "Where is Ira?" Lucian asked, looking at my empty desk. Stellan put on his best sad manager face. He sighed heavily. "I'm afraid I had to let her go, sir. While you were away, HR found significant behavioral issues, insubordination, and theft. We found confidential data on her personal drive." Lucian went quiet. He trusted me, but he was a man of logic. If HR had proof of theft, his hands were tied. He looked disappointed, not just in me, but in the situation. "I see," Lucian said tightly. "I'll review the files in the morning." Later that night, the rain was pouring down. I waited in the parking lot, watching the exit. I knew Lucian worked late. Around 10:00 p.m., he walked out to his car. Security guards stepped forward to intercept me as I approached, but Lucian saw me. He waved them off. "Ira," he said, standing in the rain. "I'm shocked. Stellan showed me the file summaries, theft." "Really?" I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't try to explain myself in the rain. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "Don't listen to me, Lucian," I said, placing the drive in his hand. "And don't listen to Stellan, listen to them." I turned and walked back to my car, leaving him standing there in the rain, the small metal drive heavy in his palm. I drove away, knowing I had done everything I could. The rest was up to him. I went home to my mother, made her tea, and waited for the morning. I knew that by sunrise, everything would change. Lucian went back into his office. He sat alone in the dark, the city lights flickering outside. He plugged in the drive. He opened the audio file. First, he heard the click of the door closing. Then, my voice asking why they were doing this. Then, Stellan's voice, clear as a bell. "It doesn't matter if it's true, Ira. It matters what's in the file. Lucian won't save you." Lucian listened to the whole thing. He heard the cruelty. He heard Mavis giggling in the background. He heard the threat against his own leadership, the assumption that he was too stupid to look past the paperwork. Then he opened the audit logs folder I had included. He saw the timestamp of Tamsin deleting my files. Lucian's face, usually so composed, turned to stone. His jaw tightened. He wasn't just angry, he was furious. He had been played. His company had been rotted from the inside out. He realized that the inefficiency wasn't due to the market, it was due to the toxic leadership of one man. He picked up his phone and dialed the head of security. "I need you here early tomorrow, and lock down the HR server. Now." The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was strange. Lucian had called an emergency, town hall, meeting for 9:00 a.m. Stellan was beaming. He wore his best suit. He was convinced that Lucian was going to announce the new strategy, Stellan's strategy, and announce Stellan's promotion to vice president. "Watch this," Stellan whispered to Tamsin as they stood in the front row. "Promotion time. I told you sticking with me was the right move." Tamsin giggled, checking her phone. Then the back door opened. I walked in. The room gasped. Stellan's eyes bulged. He marched over to me, his face red. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "Security, get her out, she's trespassing. She was fired for theft." 2 security guards stepped forward, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking at the stage. Lucian took the microphone. His voice boomed through the speakers. "Security, stand down. Ira is an invited guest." He looked directly at Stellan. "I've been reviewing the personnel files all night, and I found some disturbing discrepancies." Stellan pales, the blood drained from his face. He knew. "It seems," Lucian continued, "that we have a culture of credit stealing, intimidation, and fraud. That ends today." Lucian pressed a button on his remote. The giant projection screen behind him lit up. It wasn't a PowerPoint slide. It was the audit log showing Tamsin deleting my files. The room murmured in confusion. "And," Lucian said, "I'd like you all to hear something." He pressed play. Stellan's voice blasted over the speakers, loud and clear. "It doesn't matter if it's true. I'll blackball you in this town. You're a nobody." The entire company heard it. The secretaries, the analysts, the janitor, everyone heard the raw, unfiltered arrogance of their boss. They heard the confession of fraud and the conspiracy with HR. Stellan looked like he was going to vomit. He looked left and right, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. Mavis, standing near the exit, tried to slip away, but a security guard blocked her path. Lucian pointed to the door. "Stellan, Mavis, you are terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, fraud, and harassment. Security, please escort them out of the building. Do not let them return to their desks." The room erupted in whispers. Stellan tried to argue. He ran toward the stage, his hands waving wildly. "It was a joke," he screamed, desperate. "It was a management tactic. I was testing her resilience. Sir, please, you can't fire me. I'm the backbone of this department." Lucian turned his back on him, refusing to engage. Stellan, realizing he had lost the CEO, turned to me. He looked pathetic, stripped of his power. "Ira, tell him," Stellan begged. "We were a team. I helped you. Tell him it's a misunderstanding. I got you this job." I looked at him. I remembered the red marker. I remembered the insults. I remembered him threatening my livelihood while my mother lay sick in a hospital bed. I remembered the way he made me feel small every single day. I remained calm and composed. "You said I wouldn't last here, Stellan," I said softly, but the room was so quiet everyone heard me. "You were right. I didn't last as your victim." The security guards grabbed Stellan by the arms. He kicked and screamed as they dragged him out the double doors, his best suit bunching up around his shoulders. The silence that followed Stellan's exit was heavy. Lucian descended from the stage and walked over to me. "I apologize, Ira," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I should have looked closer sooner. I let this happen." "You looked when it mattered," I said. "That's what counts." Then I turned my attention to the corner of the room. Tamsin was sitting at her desk, frantically typing on a blank keyboard, pretending to be busy. She looked like a deer in headlights. I walked over to her. She stopped typing, her hands trembling. "Tamsin," I said gently. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. I was just following orders. He made me do it. I didn't want to lose my job." "We're auditing your work history next," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. "If you did the work, you stay. If you didn't, you go. Pack your things for today." Tamsin didn't argue. She knew the game was up. She grabbed her purse and ran out of the room crying. In a matter of minutes, the toxicity that had strangled the department for years was drained away. The air felt lighter. People started to look up from their desks. Someone actually smiled. 1 week later. The office had transformed. The fear was gone, replaced by a hum of productivity. People were actually talking to each other. The shadows that Stellan had cast over the department were finally lifting. I walked down the hallway toward the executive wing. I wasn't the CEO. I didn't want that stress yet, not with my mother still recovering. I was the new chief operations officer. It was a role that fit me perfectly. I stopped in front of Stellan's old office. It had been deep cleaned. The smell of his cheap cologne was gone. The red marker was gone. The bad energy was gone. I walked in and set my box down. Lucian knocked on the door frame, leaning against it with a smile. "Good to have you back, Ira," he said. "The place finally runs on time." "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found you in that meeting." "Good to be back, Lucian," I replied. "And you would have figured it out, you always do." He nodded and walked away to let me settle in. I reached into my box and pulled out a framed photo of my mother. She looked happy and strong. I placed it right in the center of the mahogany desk. My boss said I'd never last here. He was wrong. I was just getting started. I sat in the big leather chair, looking out the window at the parking lot where I used to cry in my car. It felt like a lifetime ago. The phone on my desk rang. It was the board. They wanted to discuss the new strategy, my strategy. I picked up the receiver. "This is Ira," I said. The voice on the other end was respectful. "Good morning, Ira. We're ready for you." I hung up and smiled. Stellan had tried to bury me, but he didn't realize I was a seed. He had tried to silence me, but he only made my voice louder. He had tried to break me, but he only revealed that I was made of steel. I grabbed my notebook, no red markers this time, and walked out of my office. The staff looked up as I passed. They didn't look down in fear anymore. They nodded with respect. I walked into the conference room, the same room where Stellan had thrown the marker at me. But this time, I stood at the head of the table. "Let's get to work," I said. And we did.